I think also like I'll raise a question. So basically, since your extensive experience in this in APAC and also international kind of business, so like I guess from your prior experience, you have a lot of cases in like doing negotiations with different people from with different cultural backgrounds. So like what kind of strategy like have you found most effective, and also how do you like balance the short-term goals and also with long-term relationships? And maybe that's what I'm curious about. So can
Yeah,
you?
well, that's
Mhm.
yeah, no, that's I mean, that's a huge subject in and of itself, right? Business development. I think I would not consider myself like pure BD guy. I've done business development on and off for a large part of my career, and I think that I think there obviously when I was in Disney, much of the business development, the deals that I was involved in were either distribution deals or licensing deals, and that requires a real sort of partner mentality, partner focus. And I think it's entirely consistent with my comments earlier about how you lead teams. You know,
Mhm.
taking, one of the things I really enjoyed about, being in a company like Disney, we had literally, when I was running Disney consumer products in Japan, I had 350 licensees, companies
Mhm. Wow.
that every year I would sign contracts, some with them, with some of them, multiple contracts per year. And which means I had a great sales and client management team. And they really, went through great pains to understand the different business objectives of the partners and try to sort of proactively propose ways that they could leverage the Disney IP to maximize their business objectives. And we would constantly discuss ways that we could partner in order to maximize the size of the business and super serve the end customers as best we can, which in the case of Disney is really the lifeline of the company. Without the fans, there's no business.
Right.
So
Mhm.
so those type of deals, the mentality when you go in and negotiate those deals is one thing. And some of those deals tend to be very long-term relationships with large companies that extend over multiple years, but you nevertheless periodically renegotiate, renew deals. A lot of our game deals would be multi-year deals, but for consumer products, for example, most of our deals were one-year deals with auto renewals, but we had these processes in place for, we had what we used to call JBP, which was actually a Disney Japan developed process, joint business planning. So we had an annual, as if like an annual budget in an internal organization, we had joint business plans with each of our key licensees. And depending on the size of the business with them, if the annual retail revenue generated by those businesses or the royalties that Disney received in those businesses were at a certain level, sometimes the business plans would be quarterly reviews. And depending on the size of the business, the general manager of the division, myself, or my directs would sit into each proposal. Sometimes they were done more at lower levels if they were smaller relationships. So it wasn't just the negotiation of the deal, but the maintenance of the relationship ongoing. In the game world, it's kind of like live ops, if you will.
Right.
In a licensed business, that's very important. Now, when you talk about some of the deals that over the past few years I've been to one degree or another involved in it at Scopely, is a lot of that has a more of an investment component to it. So that was new for me, and I learned a lot from the guys in Scopely who are very good at that in corporate development and looking at different types of companies, making different types of investments. And I think the mentality there when you go into a deal and negotiation, it's if anything, it's a more rigorous process to get to a deal because you're you're talking about making significant capital outputs and potentially acquiring companies, right? And so that means bringing all of these talented folks into your organization and being responsible for them ultimately in their careers. And again, as leaders, ultimately, when you're looking at a potential investment and an acquisition, you're ultimately thinking, how do we incorporate these folks into our organization? Are they a fit? And how could we, post investment, post acquisition, maximize the creative and financial output of that, right? So I think the mindset going into negotiations depends on the type of deal. And then in terms of short versus long term, again, it depends sometimes on the scale of the investment or the size of the partnership. But just try to give you, my specific style. I would say that I'm not the guy you see in movies, the tough guy, zero sum. It's killer.
Bang on the table.
Yeah. None of that nonsense. I don't negotiate that way. But I do think the first step, one thing I think I would like to mention here is the first step when you go into negotiation. There was a training course that we received back when I was at Disney, and there was a phrase that the man who originated the whole program came up with called BATNA. And BATNA is an acronym, right? And I think some of you may be familiar with it, which is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So it's kind of like knowing if the deal doesn't happen and you need to walk away, what are your other alternatives? So it's basically before you go into negotiation, I think one of the key things is knowing what your leverage points are, having done the proper homework in advance, understanding what levers you could pull to get a negotiated agreement that makes sense for you, and what lines you shouldn't cross. And this is often a very much a data exercise, but financially saying, okay, to make this deal make sense for us, here's sort of parameters within which I need to keep. And then at the same time, when you go into those negotiations gradually, hopefully, if you're a good negotiator, you're starting to get a better understanding of the partner's parameters, right? And because it's, a deal is only going to be successful if both partners are successful ultimately. I've had deals, by the way, I've done deals where, we were a little more successful than the partner was. And what happens there is those don't become long-term relationships. And so if you're looking just to, hey, I'm $5 million short in the current forecast and I need to come up with a quick $5 million, I need to do a quick deal. That's one type of negotiation. But if you're looking to ultimately create growth for multiple fiscal years and something that's going to become meaningful for the company's bottom line, your negotiation approach is very different as well. So I think it really depends. But going in, my style was always been to understand what my parameters were first, even before the first meeting or the first negotiation, and then spend much of the early negotiations just trying to ask questions and understand where the partner's sort of sweet spot is, what's going to make this deal exciting for them, and does that match with what we need?
Great.
Do you think that approach worked better or worse depending on who was on the other side of the table? Because what you described is kind of what I was taught when I did an MBA. That's the kind of modern, proper approach to negotiations. But I also wonder, there are different styles. There are the bang on the table people, and I don't know if the proper, thoughtful style is always the best. Like where does it shine? Where does it fall down? Or any specific examples?
That's a tough question to answer, because I think it has more to do with what type of company your organization aspires to be.
Values.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked for 4 companies in my career, and 85 to 90% of my thinking is influenced by Disney. And even today. And that's the leader I became was largely driven by my experiences in Disney, and the leader I aspire to be is still driven largely by that. And so Disney has a certain way of doing things. But even within Disney, depending on the division, it could be different. When I first joined Disney, it was a bit different than what it became during the Bob Iger era, which I think was a very healthy place to be and to learn if you were an ambitious person, because values and business results were always hand in hand. And what I learned most of all is you can do both. Being a nice person does not mean you're going to fail. I will name drop one person who no one watching this podcast may know, except Disney folks who will know very well, a gentleman named Ben Pine. And Ben is probably one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. And Ben, for a long time, was driving a lot of the negotiations for the most valuable properties of the Walt Disney Company, their cable channels, ESPN and the Disney Channel, all that. And he would go in and negotiate multi-billion-dollar distribution deals with companies like Comcast and so forth, and created incredible value during his time at Disney for Disney. And Ben was the nicest guy you ever met, and you never heard a bad word about him. Even the people who negotiated with him like him. Mm-hmm. Most people are not that saintly, but I will also say that Ben was also a brilliant negotiator who really understood his business and understood his levers and his parameters and his BATNA. And he was one of many great mentors I was fortunate to have during my time at Disney. But you can't underestimate the power of guys like that to get things done. So I think in other companies, a different approach works very well. And it really depends more on what your organization aspires to be, partially maybe also which industry you're in. Like I was, Disney Entertainment Company, very aspirational brand. It's a brand everybody knows at the consumer level. There's certain obligations that come with that, and reputation and so forth. And so I won't say all companies should do that or can do that, but it's my preference.
Okay. Yeah. That's pretty insightful. And now I'll probably can switch the direction here. So from like years of experience in Disney, so looking ahead, so what are the biggest opportunities or challenges like you see maybe facing gaming or mobile industries, like for particularly in Asia, and also like how do you stay on top of the curve so that you can always have the big pictures and also vision for the future?
Well, those are two very big questions. I'll start with the second one because I can probably answer it quicker. I mean, how do you stay on top is, I would say, surround yourself and hang out with really smart people who can teach you stuff. Read, and not just Twitter. Like read stuff. Things that people spent more than 5 minutes thinking about before they wrote. And I'm reading a book right now that is helping me think very differently about Web3. And I'm still trying to figure out, like everybody, what Web3 will mean for companies in the next few years. But I'm finding just going very old school and reading a book and spending a few hours thinking about nothing else at a time really helps. But I think in terms of trying to keep up with where the industry is headed, one good thing about getting old, and there's not a lot of good things about getting old, but one of the good things is there is something to this experience leading to wisdom thing. Like as the market was about a year and a half, 2 years ago, really making a lot of noise about Web3 and blockchain and crypto. And it just felt like the latest wave of something that has come before. But each wave is different. But you kind of understand the psyche around early stage when these paradigm shifts happen, how that impacts different organizations, and what stages in its evolution are required, not just for technology to evolve and regulatory issues to be worked through, but also consumer adoption. And you just, when you get older, you've already seen this. I saw one of these in the 90s, and then I saw one of these in the mid, around the SNS boom, the original phase of that. And so I see this as another wave in sort of the internet's evolution, and taking the time to read, to speak with people who understand it better than you do, to really not be afraid to allow your student, even when you're in your 50s.
I see.
So I would say that in terms of where the Asia is going, I think that was your other question.
Sorry. So yeah, because I think recently I've been also because I used to follow a lot of trends and also trying to catch up, but recently also like I think after my graduation I started to reading the books written by Ray Dalio on principles, and also some of his writings on history. So like he was like, so I was trying to say like it's really important to build a system for like how do you process the information and how to optimize your own human computer to try to have a really aligned system, so that can help you to grow and also evolve at the same time. So that's really important.
Michael, I couldn't agree more. I think you're absolutely right. Like you have to train your own brain, and there's a degree of discipline required, because there's just an exorbitant amount of noise anytime a new technology evolves, or a new form of gaming, or a new, like a few years ago, everybody was talking about hyper casual, and there were some companies that chased after that. And I'm not knocking hyper casual. I'm just saying that you need to be comfortable, I think, sometimes with taking a step back and trying to see how all this fits together, and build that skill into your brain and how you spend your time. That, having a little bit of discipline to say like, okay, I'm not going to spend any time on social media this afternoon. I'm going to read a couple articles on this particular, whatever it is. And go a little bit deeper there. But it's a balance. I think there's a lot of value and a lot of knowledge you can glean off of social media, and so I just think it's a bit of a balanced appetite, or balanced diet, I should say, of what you're consuming in terms of information. And I think your other question was about like game industry trends, particularly in Asia, and where it's headed. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the thing I always like to say up front in things like this is, number one, games are the largest form of entertainment in the planet. And a lot of us in the industry know that, but very few people outside of the industry actually know that. And particularly in the US, where TV and films are just so core to the DNA of the culture. And being in a company like Disney, where games is an ancillary business even to this day in terms of its contribution to EBITDA, that it's hard for people sometimes to realize that games is significantly larger at this point than any other form of entertainment, and the growth rates on games are higher. So it's actually putting distance between itself and other forms of entertainment. And within that, Asia, obviously the largest region, the dominant region, the most advanced region, the most technically and creatively dynamic industry, the region with the most talent in the industry, for sure. And so we should say that as people based in Asia, unapologetically and proud. And I think that much of the change in the next few years, as has been the last 20, will be driven out of Asia. So again, blockchain gaming, artificial
Yeah.
intelligence. Sure, a tremendous amount of innovation will come from other regions, but I think in gaming in particular, Asia will continue to lead. I do think it's important to also point out what you guys know, which is that there is no one Asia, and that even when I'm strategically trying to segment the region for the purposes of budgeting and strategic planning, I would say at this point, I view basically there's four parts to Asia, if you will. There's China, which is just China is standalone. Like you have to view China uniquely because of both the fact that it's the largest gaming market in the planet, the fact that it has the most talented workforce in the world for gaming, but also the fact that it's a heavily regulated market that's not particularly friendly to foreign companies from a publishing standpoint. It's heavily restricted, and but so there much of or a lot of the innovation that we've seen in the last few years, in particular in free to play, has come out of China, and there's just a massive amount of talent, and that's not changing. So China comes with a lot of questions if you're not a Chinese company about how to do business effectively there, but you cannot deny the importance of China as a consumer market and certainly as a producer and exporter of content. The second bucket I would say is advanced or let's say mature markets in Asia, which I put Japan at the top of the list and Korea a close second, just because it's smaller than Japan. But, I like to point this out. If you just talk about mobile gaming, Japan and Korea combined is on an absolute basis bigger than the United States, despite the fact that the populations, even when you combine them, is still only half the population of the U.S. Right. That's how big gaming is ingrained in the culture in these two countries, and a tremendous amount of innovation still comes out of Korea. Korea, the birthplace of free-to-play gaming, arguably, and Japan, the leader, the first major Asian country to get into gaming in a meaningful way, and still incredibly important. The number 3 gaming market in the world, home of Sony and Nintendo, and excluding the US, probably the single biggest generator of high value IP in the world for gaming. And so Japan and Korea, and also, high yield consumer markets, very sophisticated consumers who spend a lot in gaming and are experts in gaming, like in China. So I would say China, the mature markets, then the emerging markets would be the third bucket, Southeast Asia in particular. And what's interesting about Southeast Asia is, among other things, it's a very young population, and they're really leading the way in the newer forms of gaming, such as esports, blockchain gaming. And I think in the next few years, Southeast Asia will become a region that globally aspiring companies will pay more attention to. But there's a lot of challenges still in distributing games in Southeast Asia because of payment. Obviously different language, different cultures, different regulatory environments, and so forth. But the innovation in blockchain gaming is really been driven a large part out of that part of the world. So. And then the fourth bucket is India, which, like China, for very obvious reasons, you should look at it as its own region. As a consumer market, not as interesting yet as the other three, because it's not as big yet. But ultimately, it may be the region, well, along with Japan, that has the most local content and over time, a healthy sort of local studio ecosystem. I think today, Indian studios are just starting to show potential to be globally competitive. I don't think they're there yet, but there's a lot of positive growth happening in India, not just at the consumer level, but at the developer level. So it's one to watch.
Great.
Yeah, for sure. That's a broad review, but I think a good summary of the the diversity
Yeah.
across APAC. And there are other markets that, those buckets don't even mention. Like
Yeah.
Taiwan is the fifth or sixth largest game market in the world, and it's
Absolutely
really
so
unique.
I would definitely say, like, I sort of tend to group Hong Kong, Taiwan, Australia, New Zealand, along with like Japan, Korea, as like the mature gaming markets. You're talking about sophisticated.
Okay.
Yeah. I Because it's small, I didn't mention Taiwan, but it certainly is one of the mature markets. Obviously, small population, but highly sophisticated, high ARPU gaming market.
Right.
And
Okay.
I wouldn't. I don't lump it in with emerging markets at all. Actually, I think Taiwan is far more advanced than that.
For sure. Yeah. Well, then the first bucket has to be called mainland China, so we don't get canceled.
Yes. Yes. Well, and there's just the fundamental difference in distribution that, the very fact that there's no Google Play versus Google Play being very healthy in Taiwan and Hong Kong, that alone is a huge thing.
Yeah, definitely.
And there's the consumer preferences
really different.
Really different. So from mainland to Taiwan, for example. So I just think that they certainly, Taiwan for sure and Hong Kong for sure, within the mature markets bucket in my mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.